Comic-Con works is you submit a proposal and the committee reviews the proposals, and thankfully the committee thought that this topic, radical individualism in comics, was something that was pretty fantastic. So when Nathan reached out to me and asked if he could get on the speaker spot for tonight, we actually had to bump a speaker, but I think it's going to be very worth it. So Nathan, like I said, he runs a radio show called The New Renaissance. He is a graduate of the leadership program of the Rockies and a very good friend of mine. So please help me welcome him up to talk about individualism and comic books.
All right, I have a radio, not a radio show, a podcast, soon a website with a blog, a project that is called The New Renaissance. And the short form of what the New Renaissance is about, those of you who heard me speak last year already heard a little bit about this. Instead of talking about politics the way that many of us are used to talking about politics, I've decided to take a different approach because I see a wide and steadily widening cultural gap between those of us who believe in individual liberty and natural rights and the rest of the country. And a lot of that gap has to do with the way that, unfortunately, that we on the right talk about issues of culture, movies, music, TV, superhero comics. We tend to get up on our soapbox a lot. We tend to look down our noses and disapprove a lot. And I've decided to take the opposite tack. I want to dive in. I want to celebrate culture. And this is the big point, I want to talk to people who are in that vast middle, who don't necessarily know a lot about ideas of freedom and liberty, but they know what they like. They like the movies that are out there. They like the television shows that are out there. And if I can find a way to use those, to introduce them to these ideas that we like to talk about and think about, well, then maybe we've got something. Enter Denver Comic-Con. It's happening here in Denver this weekend at the convention center. It's a huge convention talking about comic books and science fiction. Most of the cast of Star Trek The Next Generation is going to be there for a big reunion with William Shatner moderating. It is a huge event. Two of the Doctor Who's are going to be there. The star of the WB show Arrow, about the Green Arrow, another superhero character, will be there. There's going to be a lot of people there. It's going to be a lot of fun. And most of them don't necessarily think about this stuff, or if they do, even, they perhaps come from something of a knee-jerk left-wing angle. Enter my friend Len Jelesniak. Some of you know him, many of you don't. He, like me, is a big fan of superhero comics and culture. A couple months ago, Len approached me with an idea. Nathan, let's get in and do a panel at Comic-Con. And let's introduce these ideas, but without saying words like liberty, saying words like conservative, the ones that are going to put people on guard. We're going to try to be really subversive about it. Hence, a nice neutral term, individualism, because individualism points to liberty. And we felt like we had to get past the gatekeepers on this one a little bit. There's been a trend in genre fiction, science fiction, fantasy, comics, etc., where the gatekeepers trend more and more to the left. So when we made our proposal, we had to word things very carefully so that we didn't tip our hand. And hence, we had language in there talking about superheroes as revolutionaries. Tricky language, but the great thing is it can point in any direction we want it to. So, we got our panel approved. We will be doing this on Sunday at 3:30 for anybody who feels like they want to come down. It's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully we get a good crowd. But in the meantime, wanted to get a chance to do a dry run of this and run this by some people. Now, we already did one last night. Some of you know Professor Thomas Cranowiter. He and a few other people, we gathered at Len's house. He was very impressed. Now, this is my second chance to do it, get it a little bit more polished. Len, unfortunately, could not be here. His job requires that he travel a lot. So Len is on the road, and so it's just me. But I am going to walk through the program that Len and I have in mind, And a big portion of this is going to be an interactive Q&A where we talk about some of these ideas, and I would love it if you guys would really get into this. I'm going to pose some questions as we go along, really get to thinking about this. Now, before I dive into the pre-planned program, let me ask a couple questions. How many people here feel like they are reasonably comfortable with superhero comics? You know the characters, you know the stories. Excellent, quite a few hands. All right. For those of you that don't, I'm going to make this a little bit longer than what it will be on Sunday. I will give some explanatory notes about some of the characters, some of the plot lines, so that I figure on Sunday we'll have an audience of people that don't need to have things explained to them quite so much. But for you guys, I'll give a little bit more detail. So, fantastic. Thank you guys. Welcome to Gods Among Men. Now, first thing I want to say, I want to give you an introduction as to what this program is going to be. We're talking about a philosophy of individualism. Individualism is a philosophy that says that the individual is capable, strong, and most of all, important. Superhero characters are a marvelous metaphor for this, because a superhero is just a person turned up to 11, right? You take somebody who's strong, somebody who's fast, somebody who's smart, superhero, they got a little extra oomph. And that's just a great playground to play with ideas. You know, science fiction for years has been about exploring ideas that you can't explore in conventional fiction because you need to just dial things up a little bit. So, as we talk about this, there's three main areas where I want to explore this idea of individualism as it is manifested in superhero comics. One is the superhero as a revolutionary. One is the superhero as a tyrant. And there's an interesting segue there. And then the third is the superhero as, strangely enough, an oppressed minority. So that's the general structure. And this is all going to come under the framework of a question that I want to ask. Now I'm going to skip past. When we do the program on Sunday, Len and I are going to give our introductions. The one I already gave to you about the new Renaissance, with some modifications, of course. All right, here's the question. Where do superheroes get the moral sanction to take the actions that they take? Because here's the thing about superheroes, and this is true for every single one of them. Superman, Batman, the X-Men, Spider-Man, Iron Man. It's true of every single one of them. Every single one of them is a vigilante. Every single one of them is an outlaw, a criminal. They all operate outside the framework of law and government. So the question is, where do they get off? Where do they get this authority? Now, I'm not going to answer that question right now. I just want that question to be in the back of your minds as we go through some of the content that I want to present you. And when we get to the end, I'm going to come back to this question, slightly transformed. But that is the operative question. Where do they get the moral authority, the moral sanction? Okay. Hero as revolutionary. What is a revolutionary? Somebody who pursues revolution, obviously. In the conventional usage, right, that means somebody who wants to see the existing structures overturned. Clear everything out, make way for something new, something better, that there isn't room for as things stand. That's what a revolutionary is. Somebody who wants their idea of what is right to supersede what already is there telling them what's right. That's a wonderful example of an individual standing up and expressing their individuality. Now here's another answer. The revolutionary is a doomed man. He has no private interests, no affairs, sentiments, ties, property, nor even a name of his own. His entire being is devoured by one purpose, one thought, one passion, the revolution. Heart and soul, not merely by word, but by deed. He has severed every link with the social order and with the entire civilized world, with laws, good manners, good conventions, and morality of that world. He is its merciless enemy. Boy, that's kind of dark, isn't it? And if you think about it, think about some of the conventional revolutionaries, Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, Lenin, people who are single-mindedly devoted to this idea of revolution. But what about superheroes? Here's a good example. Batman. Here's another good example. The Green Arrow. A little bit less known, the Green Arrow. He's actually very much of a mirror image of Batman. In fact, he was created sort of as a Robin Hood / Batman character, and they have a lot of things in common. In their alter egos, Bruce Wayne is Batman, Oliver Queen is the Green Arrow. They are both these millionaire playboys, sons of privilege, going out, driving fast cars, chasing women, getting drunk, but on the side, they put on a mask and they go out and they fight injustice. A lot of parallels there. But then they diverge, and the writers of each of these stories did some very different things with them. Batman is typically seen as a very Nietzschean character, very dark. He goes out and he explores the dark underworld, but he maintains his personal integrity. Batman never kills. That is his one rule. He'll beat you up. He'll beat you within an inch of your life, but there is that inch. The Green Arrow, not necessarily so much. In fact, there is a recent television show about the Green Arrow. It's just titled Arrow, and he kills people all the time. So there's a difference between them. Here's another one. Batman, those of you who know the story, he's not really the Playboy millionaire. That's a facade. That's, if you want to call it that, a mask that he wears to hide the true person that he is, a child who at the age of 10 was deprived of his parents by violence. His sense of justice and order in the world was ripped away. And this is where his revolutionary spirit enters in, because he fights every day to change that existing order of criminals getting away with crime, of injustice being perpetrated against individuals, trying to right that, to turn that back over. Revolution. And in the process, he has, have you ever noticed? Superman has Lois Lane, right? Who does Batman have? Changes every... Conventionally speaking, Superman came out in 1938, Batman 1939. They weren't thinking in those terms back then. His closest romantic liaison is Catwoman, who is actually his enemy. Batman doesn't have any lasting romantic connections. Every single Batman movie, it's been a different woman. Vicky Vale, Rachel Dawes. There isn't anybody steady because he is so passionately devoted to his cause, to his revolution. He's cut all those ties. Oliver Queen, the Green Arrow, especially in the current show, he has discovered that there is corruption at the heart of Star City. That corruption is the wealthy, the 1%. Terms that an Occupy member would understand. And taking advantage of people. And starting in the 1960s, he was written very much in terms of social justice, is the phrase. So there is a profound difference between these two, but they are both of them committed to overturning a world of injustice, and that's their revolution. Very different character in terms of revolution. Wonder Woman. We don't really think of Wonder Woman as a revolutionary, do we? But think about where she comes from. Wonder Woman is an Amazon princess, Princess Diana of Themyscira. Her mother is Queen Hippolyta. She comes from Paradise Island, where there are no men. She grew up in a society without men. And she came to our culture to introduce a different sense of what the feminine is. A feminine strength, a feminine power. She is almost the equal of Superman in the ability to fly, move fast, lift heavy stuff. But she's a double revolutionary in that not only is she seeking to subtly but powerfully overturn the order of how men and women relate in our world, she also carries that back to Paradise Island, where there are no men, because centuries ago, due to an ancient injustice, the Amazons left behind the world of men and they formed their own society. Let's not worry about how they reproduce. That's handled in a few different ways. In some cases, they're immortal and there is no reproduction needed. But she goes back to bring to Paradise Island the notion that we don't need to separate ourselves from the world of men anymore. We are incomplete. We are only half of what we could be. And that is, again, a very revolutionary concept. Round out this section, one of my favorite revolutionaries in comics, Iron Man. Now, he's not the conventional revolutionary. Oops, came off my belt. He is not trying to overturn a social order, is he? He's not trying to bring down the government. Except, for the longest time, he was a working member in that existing structure. In fact, this is kind of funny. Stan Lee, the publisher and head of Marvel Comics, the guy who created Iron Man, he has said in an interview, he explicitly created Iron Man as he modeled him off after inventor Howard Hughes, basically to tick off the hippies. In the 1960s, he wanted to create a capitalist, warmonger, technocrat superhero, hence Tony Stark. And the wonderful thing about Tony Stark is that he doesn't really live by anybody else's rules. Because of who he is, he gets to stand outside of that. And he stands as a wonderful model. In fact, I read a great essay. And this is a piece I'm not, by the way, going to bring up at the Comic-Con panel, but it was analyzing the parallels between Tony Stark and Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. Tony Stark, again, millionaire playboy. But that millionaire playboy facade hides a deadly serious intent. Francisco d'Anconia, millionaire playboy, but that hides a deadly intent. Tony Stark, this especially happens in Iron Man 2. Do any of you remember the scene? He's up before a Senate committee. They want to confiscate from him the Iron Man suit, and he has the best line in any of the movies. You want to take my property, you can't have it. Hank Reardon, up in front of a government committee, they want to take his steel. He says, you can't have it. Iron Man, Atlas Shrugged. And as such, he is perhaps the best revolutionary because he is seeking to overturn a system that denies the worth and the power of the individual. Revolutionary, an individual who stands up and says, I see that the world is not right. I am going to make it right. But again, I want to ask this question. Where do these heroes get the moral sanction, the authority? Where do they get off doing what they do? Well, we'll come back to that. But where's the authority from? And even more so, what happens when a hero no longer is content to just say, I want to fight injustice, I want to fight crime, people are getting hurt, I want to put those criminals away, but in fact says, you know what, this whole system is destructive of lives, I'm going to take it over. I am going to make things right, large scale. And here's where we get to the idea of the hero as tyrant, which is a vigilante taken to a much larger degree. And that, believe it or not, we have a couple of examples. Now, surprisingly, Superman has not been explored in this avenue, not very much. There's a couple of examples. There is a video game called Injustice that explores what would happen if Superman took over and became a tyrant. And there's a comic that spun off from that. There was, back in the 1960s, a Superman comic which explored what would happen if Superman was a tyrant, but they kind of played a little trick because Kal-El lost his superpowers, and he had to retire, and he brought up somebody from the bottled Kryptonian city of Kandor, gave him his powers, gave him the mantle of Superman, and this guy turned out to be a jerk who was constantly building statues to himself and not really worrying about the fact that Lex Luthor was out and running free, and it ended up Superman had to take him back down. And that's about all I was able to find. But think about how terrifying the prospect of Superman as tyrant really is. Think about how powerful he is. He really is ultimately powerful. He has absolute power. And what did Lord Acton tell us? Power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. How could that not be true of Superman? He grew up, right, as a kid in Smallville. Tell me, when little Clark misbehaved, when he got his hand in the cookie jar, how exactly did Ma and Pa Kent give him a spanking without breaking their hands? Okay, so maybe they didn't have to. Maybe Clark Kent, Kal-El, was always so good. He always had this keen sense of what is right, what is wrong. They never had to discipline him. That, in a way, is even more terrifying because what does somebody who has never felt temptation to do wrong, what are they going to do with absolute power and faced with people who feel temptation every day? where are they going to derive the compassion to deal with those people in a way that does not grind them into the dust? Now, this is all very hypothetical, but there is, in fact, a comic storyline that explored this very directly. And this is about 10 years ago. A storyline was explored in Marvel Comics dealing with Thor, the god of thunder. And in this storyline, Odin was killed fighting the fire giants, and the Odin power passed on to Thor. Now, Thor in the comics always had a human side, his human alter ego, and then the Thor side, the superhero. Well, they were split apart. So now you had the human living just a purely human life, and you had the god, Thor. And he realizes he's got this magnificent power to do anything he wants. What does he want to do? Well, he wants to heal the world's hurts. There's people starving. There's people suffering. There's all this bad stuff. And all of a sudden, he has the power to make it right. How do you think that went? It went to some very dark places. Here we have a couple panels of Thor talking to a Catholic priest. The Catholic Church is kind of upset. They are getting slowly squashed out by Thor's mission, where he's pretty much taken over. And this priest is saying, we worry about how you are getting in the way of our mission. And Thor says, you've had thousands of years to pursue your mission. There's still people hungry. There's still people starving. You're part of the existing power structure. I see suffering, I remedy it. Where is the crime? Where does he get the authority to do that? There's this wonderful set of panels where a conservative radio host talks about what's going on. God knows we're an imperfect people. We've made so many mistakes that it's amazing we ever made it out of the caves. But we survived. We learned from our mistakes, and we'd continue to do so, but Thor won't let us. By doing everything for us, he's taking away our ability to learn while we act like fat, lazy teenagers. Interesting side note. This was written during the Bush administration. Too mesmerized by the bells and whistles of the latest video game to care about the war right outside the window. I know people who are convinced they'll never have to work again because the Asgardians will bring them riches beyond imagination. Let's do a little substitution there. They think immortality is right around the corner for us all. I'm telling you, Thor is ushering in a lack of responsibility that will be the death of us if we don't send him packing. And this is explored even more directly where we see what humanity has made of these gifts that Thor, the Asgardian, has brought. Unfinished houses, crops withering in the fields, people just sitting on their behinds because everything is being given to them. And at the very last, Thor confronts his human alter ego, who tries to reason with him, who tries to talk him down. Finally, his human alter ego picks up the hammer of Thor, Mjolnir, hits Thor. Thor kills the human. And he comes to this realization, they've been saying I'm going too far. In reality, I haven't gone far enough. And he goes to pick up the hammer, Mjolnir, and he can't. Because it says on the hammer, whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. He lost the power because he went too far and he lost being worthy. That's a profound exploration of what tyranny really is. And what is tyranny? Well, simply put, the ends justify the means. Last example, comic came out in the 1980s. There was a film about this, a film made from it a few years ago, The Watchmen. The Watchmen starts off as a mystery story. You've got a superhero team that's been around for decades. One of them, elderly, paunchy, balding, alcoholic, is murdered. In investigating this murder, another one of the team gets framed for the murder. The mystery eventually leads to one of their former members, a man named Ozymandias, Adrian Veidt, the smartest man in the world. He uses 100% of his brain capacity, and using that, he has determined that the world is going to destroy itself. We are going to destroy ourselves if he doesn't do something. And what does he do? He sets forth a plan in which he murders one of his teammates. He frames another teammate for the murder. He brings destruction, mass destruction to New York City, destroying half the city, blames it on yet another one of his teammates, the Dr. Manhattan, who's pictured here, sending him packing off the planet, his last link to humanity severed. And oh, by the way, he kills half the population of New York City. And he in fact says, millions of lives to save billions. That's what Ozymandias says. And the comic ends on a really ambiguous note. Did he make the right decision? Do the ends, in fact, justify the means? It's one of the things I love about comics. There's so many good questions.
The greatest number.
Exactly. Bingo. Or how did our friends from Star Trek put it? Many outweigh the needs of the few. Or the one. Exactly. So that's the hero as Tyrant. And where do they get off? Where do superheroes get the moral sanction to take the actions that they take? Now, it's very natural to fear that somebody with superior abilities, an Ozymandias, a Superman, a Thor, might take it into their minds to do stuff like this. So perhaps in a world where there are superheroes, the wise thing to do is to take preemptive measures to stop them before they get to that point. And this is where we get to the final section, the hero as oppressed minority. And yes, I just heard it said, there is a comic that was created in 1963 as an absolutely explicit exploration of this theme and exploration of themes of bigotry and racism. I'm talking about the X-Men. The X-Men are mutants. Mutants are superheroes who were born with their powers. They don't manifest until puberty, but their genes were altered. They are a mutation. There is, in fact, a tremendous movie out right now. If you haven't seen it, please trust me. You will not be wasting your time or your money if you go see X-Men Days of Future Past. It is fabulous. Not least because of how it explores a lot of these ideas that I'm talking about right now. A theme that has been explored throughout, there's been 5 X-Men movies, starting in 2001 right up to this year. And in every single one, a theme that is explored is what's called anti-mutant hysteria. Anti-mutant racism, essentially. And how mutants deal with this. And this theme is exemplified very specifically by 2 opposing characters who appear in every single one of the movies. Professor Charles Xavier, the owner and headmaster of a school for gifted youngsters, i.e. young mutants, teaching them how to responsibly use their abilities, how to blend into society, how to merge in a non-threatening way, how to coexist with humans. And on the other side, Magneto, a superpowered mutant who can use magnetism to move metal around, who has taken it in his head to fight the humans very directly. And why does Magneto do this? He is a fascinating character. Here's a still from the very first movie of a young Eric Lenscher, the future Magneto. Where is he? Does anybody know? Auschwitz concentration camp. He is a Jew. He is brought into the concentration camp along with his parents. And he sees his parents. When you enter the concentration camp, if you went to the right, it meant life. If you went to the left, it meant death in the ovens. His parents went to the left, and he's panicking, he's freaking out, and that's the moment that his mutant powers emerged. Magneto, according to all the stories, spent his youth in the concentration camps, and there he learned a very bitter lesson about what humans are capable of doing to those who are different. My name is Max Eisenhardt. I've been a Sonderkommando at Auschwitz for almost 2 years. I watched thousands of men, women, and children walk to their deaths. I pulled their bodies from the gas chambers. I dug out their teeth so the Germans could take their gold. And I carried them to the ovens where I learned how to combine a child's body with an old man's to make them burn better. I saw my fellow workers buried alive under an avalanche of rotting corpses. I saw thousands of murdered people burning in a giant outdoor pits. I have seen at least 250,000 dead human beings with my own eyes, and I couldn't save a single one. This is the legacy that Magneto was left with from his time in the concentration camps. And you might think to yourself, how could he not learn that the proper solution to people using force against you is to rise up and use force of your own? Okay, we went to a very dark place there. Another character in the X-Men stories is Mystique, and you can't go anywhere in the culture these days without running into Frozen. Don't let them in. Don't let them see. Be the good girl you always have to be. Conceal, don't feel. Don't let them know. Well, now they know. let it go, can't hold it back anymore. Mystique is a fascinating character. I was actually going to go to Magneto's mirror image originally when we first planned this. And his mirror image is, again, Charles Xavier. And I'm going to come back to Xavier. But I think Mystique is a much better counter to Magneto because Mystique, when we first meet her in the first X-Men movie, she is a cold, hardened killer, bitter, angry, a revolutionary, will kill a human, a Homo sapiens, without a second thought. Because they are not people to her. Only her fellow mutants are people. But she had to start somewhere. And in not this current movie, but the one before that, X-Men First Class, we see the young Mystique as she meets the young Charles Xavier. They're both kids, and he adopts her as a kid sister. And she accompanies him for many years until they meet Magneto. And she is confronted with a choice. There's Charles's way. Blend in, hide yourself. Mystique's power, for those of you who don't know, she can change her form at any time. She could look like any one of us in this room, and then in the blink of an eye, look like somebody else. So it's the easiest thing in the world. Second nature for her to hide, to conceal herself. She would never have to face the kind of oppression and violence that is directed towards mutants if she didn't want to. But a question gets asked of her. Why not stay in disguise all the time? You know, look like everyone else. Because we shouldn't have to. And this is where Magneto enters in, because Magneto says, you are beautiful as you are. You should never, ever hide yourself. And so she is torn between the two people that different people want her to be. Charles wants her to be Raven, the girl that he knew from childhood. Magneto wants her to be Mystique, this hardened killer. Who's she going to be? And this is what's so good, because the movie X-Men Days of Future Past that's out right now, that's exactly the question that it explores in depth. Now, I mentioned that Charles is not the best example, and here's why. He is, in fact, a perfect mirror image of Magneto. Now, there have been 5 X-Men movies, as I said. The least of them is X3, The Last Stand, came out in 2006. For those of us who are fans, it was a huge disappointment. But it had one element that I thought was absolutely perfect. There's a character in the X-Men movies named Jean Grey. And in the 3rd movie, she had an enormous power for destruction welling up inside her, seemingly irrepressible. And we find out that that power has been there since she was a child. But Charles Xavier, fearing what that power might do, fearing what she might do with that power, put in place mental blocks, hid those capabilities, hid that power, hid that part of herself from Jean. Those blocks started to unravel, and all hell broke loose. He applied force. Magneto's solution was to apply force against human beings. Xavier's solution was to apply force against his fellow mutant. They were both wrong. And in fact, in X-Men Days of Future Past, and okay, I'm going to blow something for you. Sorry. Spoiler alert. Charles Xavier says, Raven, please don't do this. I won't tell you what the this is. Get out of the way, Charles. This is going to make us an enemy. Look around you. We already are. That's what they say to each other. And then finally, Xavier says, I have faith in you, Raven. I believe you are not the kind of person humanity sees you to be. I've been trying to control you from the beginning. Everything that happens now is in your hands. He redeems himself. He sets her free to make her own choice, to stand up and be an individual. Where do superheroes get the moral authority? Come on. Where do they get the moral sanction to take the actions that they take? And that concludes the prepared remarks. Thank you guys very much. I'm sorry Len couldn't be here. This is so much fun. I love doing this. I could do this every day. Okay, so now I've got some questions, some leading questions that I want to use to pull us into the discussion. First question. Should exceptional individuals be controlled to protect society?